Evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. Who controls the lights? Can you turn them down a tiny bit? Just these, so I can see people. Thanks for coming out on a Wednesday evening. Hope you enjoyed the thunderstorm this afternoon. We've got a bunch to cover, so we'll get straight into it. I'll start by acknowledging we're a Ngunnawal country. I think this is an incredible part of the country to live in, and want to acknowledge that Ngunnawal people have a hundreds and hundreds of generation connection to this land, and acknowledge their elders, past and present. The format for tonight, for people who haven't been to a town hall tonight, I'll give a little bit of a recap. We had a parliamentary sitting week, and then we had a week of estimates, so I'll give a bit of a recap on that. Then we're going to have our two guest speakers, Greg Harford and Skye Cappuccio, and then we'll move to Q&A. We'll have some from Slido as per usual, so people have submitted questions, you can upvote them, and then we'll come to the floor and probably just alternate between them. But we'll try and leave as much time as possible for questions at the end. And if you do want to upvote a question, you can scan that, take a photo of that, I guess. Right. So a quick recap of what happened in Parliament. It was the first official week back. We obviously had the few days, was it, for the post-Bondi, where we had sort of speeches, and then the I think problematic legislation was rammed through, but we'll get to that a bit later. So next one. One of the things my team and I have been working on with Dr. Helen Haynes, the member for Indi, is really to push the government on ending placement poverty for all medical and health students. To the government's credit, they actually brought in a means-tested system of assisting students in 4 professions when they have a mandatory unpaid placement. To finish the job, we just need to extend that to all medical and allied health students. These are students that are, in some cases, required to do thousands of hours of unpaid pracs, often sort of in a regional town, and so they're paying rent wherever they're going to university, and then they're obviously having to find a place. And some of the stories from young people as to how they're getting by or how they're not getting by are like really sad, and unfortunately we're seeing a huge dropout rate from families who don't have wealthy parents. And I think in a country like Australia, it shouldn't matter how wealthy your parents are. If you want to study medicine, or become a physio or a psychologist or whatever it might be, you should be able to do that. So we've had it costed. It's a fairly modest, as far as the budget goes, $290 million over 4 years to provide that means-tested assistance to all students who require it. We've also been doing some work on funding ovarian cancer and gynecological cancer research. It seems like this is an area where we haven't spent enough money as a country. It hasn't been a focus, and for decades we really haven't seen the improvements that we've seen with other forms of cancer. And so there's a really good proposal that's been put together, and myself and other parliamentarians have been pushing the government to deal with what is one of the most deadly forms of cancer in the country. 50% of women still die within 5 years of a diagnosis, and so there's lots to do there. There's some great researchers that simply need more funding to actually look at some of the solutions. See a couple of sort of international things that were happening with President Herzog's visit. Obviously spent time with members of the Jewish community here in the ACT. There's a variety of views, but there are many in the Jewish community who took solace from the President of Israel visiting. I think when it comes to social cohesion, it was the wrong decision to invite him, given the very serious allegations and findings against him. And so it was a little bit of a flashpoint in the Parliament, and I tried to, I guess, make that nuanced point that, whilst some people may get solace from this, I think when you look at social cohesion more broadly, we really have to find other ways to actually unify people. The other one was raising concerns on behalf of Iranian Australians. This is something that I think really hasn't got enough coverage, just given the scale of the horrific atrocities over there. And there are so many Iranian Canberrans and Australians more generally who are feeling like there hasn't been much attention, their voices aren't being heard. And so I actually worked with the entire Senate for the Senate to pass a motion essentially condemning what's happening over there, and standing with Iranian Australians. I think at a previous, I don't know if anyone was at the previous town hall where we talked about the Freedom of Information Bill, but the government has introduced this FOI bill, which they say is necessary because FOI requests are taking a long time, they're costing a lot of money, but if you look at the bill, this is really an attack on freedom of information. It makes it much harder to get information out of the government. And we had a Senate inquiry into it, and not a single person who made a submission or a witness, other than the department, said that this bill was a good thing. The crossbench tried to dump the bill in the last sitting, and it ended up being the entire crossbench voting against Labor and the Liberals. The Liberals say they don't like it, but they still voted to keep it on the papers. So this is something that will continue to really try and send Labor back to the drawing board when it comes to FOI. There's some real concerns about the amount of secrecy that we're seeing from the Albanese Labor government. And if costs are the issue, we know that there's a whole bunch of companies, including Canberra companies, who've actually been developing software and AI sort of systems to actually ensure that can happen much quicker and much cheaper. The last one there that we had a real focus on was around youth homelessness. This is still something that's happening across the country, and frustratingly, the answer that I get from the Labor government is that they have the Housing Australia Future Fund, which I think is a great thing. I really applaud them for their investments. But the way that the system is set up is because there's a difference between youth allowance and job seeker, and community housing providers, I guess, take a percentage, 30% of what you're getting from that payment. If you're on youth allowance, no community housing providers can afford to take you. And so there's basically nowhere to go. And so we've really been trying to put to them a solution to bridge that gap between job seeker and youth allowance, so that young people who do need a place to stay can actually afford to get into one. What's next? Then we moved on to Senate estimates. I was asking questions about the petroleum resource rent tax and our gas exports. This is something that I've been banging on about for the last 4 years. It makes no sense that we are such a big gas exporter. We sort of alternate between number one or two, depending on the year, and yet we're not getting a good return. And so I was asking some questions about the difference between gas and beer. It turns out we get about $1 billion less from petroleum resource rent tax than beer. The spirits excise is actually more than the beer excise. And then I think wine is just a little bit less than PRT. So if you put it into, I guess, terms that everyone can identify with, it's expensive to go and get a beer. We should be getting far more for our gas. And there's a solution for that. The ACTU has put forward a solution to have a flat 25% tax on gas exports, and that has been endorsed by many industry groups, by experts, and I think is a really sensible way to go forward to ensure that we have the gas we need here in Australia, for households, for industries, for manufacturers, and we're also getting a good return when we do export it. There's a bunch of ACT issues, and obviously this town hall is very much focused on ACT issues. You'll see them there. We've been doing a bunch of advocacy and joining up with Tom Emerson, who's here tonight on Commonwealth Park. The bulk billing rate, again, to Labor's credit, they've put a huge amount of money into bulk billing, and we've seen around the country a really good spike in bulk billing rates, sort of back up to, I think, really healthy levels. It's barely moved the dial here in the ACT. So there's, I think, some deeper issues here around workforce and the number of GPs that we really need to get the government to act on, and so we'll certainly keep pushing on that. We've heard a bunch from people about the Hume Circle precinct, some of the concerns there. We've been dealing with people, talking to the NCA, seeing what we can do there to ensure that there's a really good process. Rabbits. I was asking a bunch of questions at Estimates about our lack of investment in the next biocontrol virus. Australia's led the world when it comes to rabbit biocontrol, but I really think we've dropped the ball over the last decade. We know that there's this natural build-up in resistance, and we currently are seeing rabbit numbers explode across the country. And asking CSIRO about it, they said, well, it'll be at least 10 years before we have the next virus. And kind of goes to this lack of long-term thinking and investment. So something I'll keep pushing on. ANU, we're up at Estimates again, was asking a bunch of questions about governance, and I'm hearing from people at ANU that things are improving, but there's still a very long way to go there. The Sydney to Canberra rail link, I learned that the New South Wales government has actually been talking to the Federal Department of Infrastructure. The AC government hasn't. And so I really hope that changes. This is such a sensible investment to try and bring that journey down. I applaud the Labor government for taking on high-speed rail. That's a multi-decade project. I think in the meantime, some investment in faster rail would be great. The Commonwealth Ave Bridge Works is something I'll keep asking the NCA about and ensuring that it happens as fast as possible. The CSIRO funding has been a really disappointing one. They managed to get $233 million more dollars, and that's basically not saving a single job. There's some very deep issues when it comes to funding of research in this country, and we basically just haven't been putting enough into organisations like CSIRO. And so I think if we really do want to be the clever country in the future, that really needs to change, and something I'll keep pushing on. And then was asking some questions, I guess in a related way, of the Australian Research Council. One of the interesting things that came up at Estimates was around ACMA, which is the Australian Communications and Media Authority. And the ABC has done some really great journalism on this through FOI to show that ACMA, who are our regulator, have this habit, and this happened, I think, most egregiously with CommBank, of finding companies are guilty, doing up a press release, and then sending it to them to check off. And it turns out, in this case with Commonwealth Bank, so this is, I think, one of the biggest fines they've ever issued. They sent it to Commonwealth Bank, and CommBank got straight on the phone, managed to call a couple of executives at ACMA, I don't know how they had their numbers, but sure, and convinced them to delay the media release until after their AGM, which is, I find, astounding, and I think raises some real questions about regulators in Australia. We sort of have this habit of having voluntary industry codes, or industries sort of setting their own codes, and then regulators who seem to be engaging in this sort of behaviour. And so it's certainly something myself and my team will keep pushing hard on. So with that, as I said, and you would have seen on the flyer, keen to talk about ACT issues. We wanted to have it here in Civic, given the works that are happening and will be happening for many years to come. We've been engaging with a bunch of businesses around here who are genuinely doing it tough. Some Canberra institutions who are really struggling to keep going. And so have invited Skye Cappuccio, who's the CEO of COSBOA, and Greg Harford, who's the CEO of the Canberra Business Chamber, to join me on stage. Please come up and I'll... Oh, they're here, right. Thank you for joining us. Skye, I might start with you, if that's okay. Would you be able to give us, maybe briefly introduce yourself, your organisation, and I guess some of the key priorities for small businesses nationally and what you're seeing there?
Yes, certainly. Thank you very much, Senator. So my name's Skye Cappuccio. I'm the CEO of the Council of Small Business Organisations of Australia, which is a national organisation. Our members are predominantly peak associations where there's a lot of small businesses. So everything from the Master Builders Association to the Pharmacy Guild to the Australian Hairdressing Council, organisations representing restaurants and cafes, etc. I am brand new to this role. So I have been in the role less days than I have fingers and toes, and I have a rather normal number of fingers and toes. So you have to forgive me if I get any of our stats wrong. I'm also a Canberra local, so a lot of the issues that you are shining lights on tonight are very dear to my heart. I would say in terms of the broader small business space at a national level, there's some things I want to highlight that I think we need to be doing in terms of policy context. But I think the important thing to understand is the broader context that small business across the country is existing in at the moment. And it's tough. It's hard. All of our data and all of our anecdotal sources, and I'm keen to hear from Greg as well on exactly how that's playing out in the ACT, are giving us very strong signals that conditions for small business in Australia at the moment are just not working. So it's things like we know that for small business it's like if you own a small business and you're working full time, about 55% of those people are making less than the average wage of full time of people working full time. We also know that about 40% of small businesses, so there's about 2.7 million small businesses in Australia, and about 40% of those are not making a profit, which compares to about 15% of larger businesses who are not making a profit. At COSBOA, we do quite a lot of surveying of small businesses to really understand the experience on the ground. And we know from surveys at the end of last year, or in the second half of last year, that in the last 12 months, about 60% of small businesses went through a period where they were not paying themselves. And an even higher number went through a period where they were dipping into their personal funds to keep their businesses afloat. And I share these things not in any way to suggest that small business is doing anything wrong. Small business continues to be, it is by its very definition, often a hub of extreme optimism and innovation. But to point out that the context and the conditions we have at the moment for small business are not working, and we need to be having serious conversations about tweaking those. We're obviously at a national level having serious conversations about productivity, and there's I think broad acknowledgement that we really need to be doing better to enhance productivity. Small business makes up about 30% of our GDP. So when we're talking about productivity and highlighting that the contexts and the conditions are not working for small business, we need to be having a serious conversation about what we can do to make small business work as well as it possibly can. So making the productivity in those spaces increase. I feel there's a lot to say about that, and there's probably a deep conversation to be having about comprehensive tax reform. But leaving those things aside, because I don't think you want to go down that avenue tonight, some of the I guess, lower hanging fruit things there that we really need to see, particularly from the Commonwealth, is greater investment in capital and equipment. Like if you're looking to enhance productivity of labour hours in a small business, that is low hanging fruit. It's been very disappointing from our perspective to see some recent responses from the government around not increasing instant asset write-off, and we're waiting to see what will happen in the budget around that. We fundamentally need to be supporting digital uplift and greater use of AI into small business to enhance some of those efficiencies. we need to be talking about skills. Depending on the industry that you are working in, that's the wrong way of phrasing that. I would say most small businesses, about 60%, report major skills deficits within their small businesses. And it hits different depending on the industry you're working in. This week alone, I've had conversations in the construction space with the hairdressers. Super paranoid to hear that there is a major shortage of hairdressers coming through. Takes a lot of work for me to look this average. But we need to be talking about and addressing the policy levers that can incentivise more skills going into those spaces that we really need them. And the very last point that I would make is that we really have a very significant regulatory burden on small business. Any of you in the audience work in small businesses probably know this. Our estimates are that if a small business owner usually spends about 15 hours on admin to do with regulatory compliance, which is not a way to enhance efficiency or not a way to create productivity. We've seen internationally some really fantastic efforts by governments by setting targets about how much regulatory reduction that you need to really reduce that burden and to enhance productivity that way. I feel I could go on, but I might leave it there.
Thank you, Skye. That's really useful, a great overview. Greg, in a Canberra context, what's happening? How does that fit?
Yeah, thank you very much, David. So I'm the Chief Executive of the Canberra Business Chamber. We're a not-for-profit membership association representing business owners here in the ACT. Sometimes people think that we are funded by the ACT government, but we're not. We are funded by our members, and we're essentially here to speak up for the business sector on a range of territory and federal issues. I think the local picture is actually very similar to the one that Skye is talking about nationally. The biggest issues that I'm hearing about are the cost of doing business. It's really expensive to run a small business, and those costs are escalating. Wage increases for staff are part of the problem. Government taxes, levies, charges are a significant issue, particularly here in the ACT. Utilities, insurance is a massive issue. The cost of that is increasing very, very rapidly, and again, I think possibly more so here in the ACT, particularly around things like workers' compensation insurance. I'm hearing about skills shortages and the availability of labour, although I have to say I did cut my 2-year-olds here the other day, so if you run into trouble, Skye, I'm happy to step in. And then red tape, regulation and compliance is just a massive issue. There's some data I saw recently. In fact, we published recently suggesting a quarter of ACT businesses are spending up to sort of between $50,000 and $100,000 a year complying with government rules and government regulations. So it's a massive cost that's just really, really unproductive and is just taking up time and diverting business owners from what they do best, which is running their business. And of course, here in the city, in Canberra, there's massive disruption. We've got light rail construction, we've got some private sector building construction going on as well. We've got the Commonwealth Bridge closure situation. All of that's going to go on for the next 2.5 to 3 years at a minimum, and that's really taking away customers from many of the businesses here in the city. Retail and hospitality are heavily hit by that, but so too are services businesses, lawyers, dentists, that sort of thing. So I guess the other thing I'd say, just to echo Skye's comment, at both a national and local level, the chamber network is really putting huge amounts of effort into pushing the need for productivity improvements. Our national productivity growth rate's less than 1%. In the US, it's somewhere between 2 and 4%. We're falling behind. There's some real speed limits on the economy, and we've got to take that handbrake off and get things moving. That means more business investment and getting things moving more quickly. We've got to get rid of red tape and stupid regulatory rules. And I know you're a supporter, but anything you can do to help get that instant asset write-off increased and locked in as a permanent feature of the business tax system, I think would be a really positive thing. And really, I'd like to see governments getting in behind small businesses better. It's really hard when your costs are going up, when your customers can't afford to pay or aren't paying or aren't coming to your business, and particularly here in the city, I think we really need to see the local government coming to the party with some support for small businesses.
Thank you, Greg. Maybe we'll start there with the impacts. What sort of supports should we be seeing? We hear that, well, it's going to be great for businesses once it's all done, and it will be, but that's a few years away, and we want these businesses to be there in a few years. So what are you hearing would help, and are there examples of elsewhere where they've actually helped businesses get through the construction phase?
I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, what I'm hearing is that businesses are really, really stretched. Most hospitality businesses are operating on a net profit margin of somewhere between 3 and 5%. So that means for every $100 that a customer's spending in store, there's about $3 or $5 profit in that for the person who owns the business. So if you take 10% of your customers away, you're suddenly facing a situation where your costs are not... You're not covering your costs with your revenue. So really, I think we need to see some financial support for government. There's a few things that could be done. One is potentially to look at some kind of rates relief. Rates are a massive cost if you're a business. They're a massive cost for homeowners, but they're even a bigger cost for businesses. And unlike residential ratepayers, if you're a tenant in a building here in the city, you're likely paying those rates to the government. Your lease with your landlord will pass that responsibility on to you. We could go further and talk about some kind of JobKeeper payment. There's precedent for that through COVID, not so much in construction, but it is interesting to note that the High Court has recently ruled that the construction of the George Street light rail in Sydney did in fact create a nuisance that might lead to some compensation being justified. So we're still kind of looking at that, but yeah, I think we do need to see government come to the party because we want those businesses to be there at the end of the day, and there is a real risk that some of them will tip over the next couple of years.
And do you think there's the need, rather than having this fight every time there's a big infrastructure project, to actually sort of bake in some sort of mechanism or trigger where there's an assessment and there's supports to ensure that small businesses can get through? You sometimes hear the sort of line, well, small businesses need to make do and the good ones will survive, the bad ones don't. But I'm hearing from businesses who've been here for 20, 30 years that they are not sure if they'll get through.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. You've got to have a systemic approach to it. And yes, there are challenges from a government point of view about where you draw the lines and what that looks like. But there's also things that could be done to manage things a little bit better. The original briefing I had on the works on London Circuit, for example, had them closing off a block at a time for a couple of months. And then we turn around and find that actually the whole of London Circuit is being closed for the best part of 3 years. That might make sense from a construction point of view, but it's taking a massive cost to those small businesses, and if that's the way government wants to go, we do think government needs to come to the party.
I guess on the broader issue of valuing small businesses and changing, I hear a lot of talk about small business in Parliament. People talk about the instant asset write-off. For those of you who aren't as familiar, there's this instant asset write-off that's been around for at least
10 years, 2015.
2015 it was brought in, and every year it's in the budget, but it's a new measure, and the government announces, there's $250 million for small businesses, and it's like, hang on, this was the measure that was in the last budget that small businesses are counting on to make these investments, and there's been a push to make it permanent. Despite all the talk, every time I've moved amendments to make it permanent, I think Labor's voted against it, and the Libs have abstained from the vote. So how do we get people to sort of match the rhetoric with actions?
I think that's such a good point, because I agree there's a lot of talk about small business and small business productivity up on the hill, and we are very welcomed into so many spaces and feel very heard, but it's converting that into action that is what's lacking at this point. And I agree that the instant asset write-off is such a good example of that. If it's an easy way of enhancing productivity of small business at a time when we are talking daily and need to be talking daily about productivity. And it really needs to be made permanent, or if not permanent, at least give people a 3 to 5 year runway so that they know that Because if you want it to have that impact on productivity, small businesses who might be turning over, the most common amount that small businesses turn over is really small. So if you're turning over $200,000, it's quite significant time you need to plan for an investment that might be $10,000 or $15,000, and the ability to write that off really impacts your planning and whether or not you can afford that. So you need to be enabling people to think about that ahead of time. But in terms of getting impact, in terms of political will to change that, we're not there yet, and we've just seen the government come out again and confirm that they won't be making that permanent. So any help you can lend in that space is most appreciated.
We'll certainly keep pushing it. One final question, then I'm keen to open it up. I'm sure there'll be more questions about this. When it comes to artificial intelligence, what are you seeing, and where you seeing this go? I guess I've got real concerns about the lack of safeguards, but I think most of them probably go to the misuse of it, and then probably the use by big businesses that have the capacity to potentially lay off big sections of their workforce as they can replace them with AI agents or whatever it might be. But in a small business context, it seems like a great tool. What's the uptake like, and what could be done to actually try and enhance that?
That's such a good question. I feel like, I've literally been in this role 3 weeks, and I feel like I've had at least 5 or 6 conversations about the potential of AI in small business each and every day. But the conversion of that seems to be a very different conversation. So we are talking about things like the use of AI, like we might use in our personal lives, to streamline your emails, to make the admin work that you're doing because of the regulatory burden much more efficient, to support your marketing, get your ads out there on socials, those sorts of things. And I think there's a lot of tools out there, but the awareness of how to utilise those tools and the trust in AI isn't there yet. And I think combined with that, we need to think about the fact that a lot of small businesses are not that digitally literate. The average age of a small business person is over 50, so they may not have grown up with that level of digital literacy. So I think we actually need targeted support for small business to uptake AI tools in ways that enhances productivity but is safe. So we don't see people sharing their finances with Claude or any of those, or ChatGPT or any of those sorts of things.
I think Skye's right that the uptake of AI tools in business deteriorates very quickly depending on the size. So if you're a big firm, you're much more likely to have adopted some tools. If you're a small firm with 5 or fewer employee, the number from memory is sort of 20 or 30%, something like that. So there's a lot of room for growth. I think part of the problem is just bandwidth for small business owners. They're busy trying to file their BAS statements. They're busy trying to sort their accounting out. They're trying to service their customers and do everything. Often, if you've got a couple of people, there's big sort of human resource management issues you've got to deal with as well. So I think there's a bandwidth issue. There's also a training issue. We are actually going to run a couple of events here in Canberra during March and May, I think, for business owners to help upskill them. So that's available for anyone who wants to come along. But you're right, Skye. We need to really work out how we can drive that uptake, make people aware of the tools, and help people perhaps not be afraid of the technology.
Well, thank you both. We'll go to questions. We might start with a Slido, if someone's got the... What federal oversight ensures NCA powers after consultation are limited to genuine national significance and don't expose homes to redevelopment pressure? As I said, there's the proposal for development on and around Hume Circle. There's a proposed, well, they're consulting on changes to the territory plan. I'm assured by the NCA that once there are changes to the plan which would allow developments in that area up to a certain height, then there is a whole nother application process, public consultation. But obviously I think we need to get those changes right to actually set the right constraints on what can and can't happen there. And I think that's why this process is really important, and I'll continue to engage with the NCA on that. I think there's some very genuine concerns from some of the neighbours in the area who maybe aren't part of the the project area, but about their rates going up and what that might mean. So we've got to be listening to those people as well. If you have a question, chuck your hand up and Lily will bring a mic.
Hi. Firstly, thank you so much, Senator Pocock, for your representation to the Minister on this issue and the extension, to support an extension of that consultation. That's my question. And I note that your answer is that there will be more consultation.
That's what the NCA has said to me.
Yeah, and that's what they've said to us as well. But from our perspective, it looks as if they can put out a DA, rezone the area, and then development approval lies with them. All they need to do at all stages is consult. There's no approval from the ACT. There's no approval from residents or business owners in the area, which are also deeply affected on the industrial side of our circle. So I'm deeply concerned. I want to know what the safeguards are, and if there's none, that's enough of an answer in itself. But it doesn't sound like they have to do anything other than ask for a public opinion, and then from go to woe, it's all, if the NCA thinks it's good, it's good.
So my understanding is that is the process as you've outlined, and I've pushed them to extend consultation to get the amendments to the plan right, because once that does happen, I have said to them, I think there's a bit of a trust deficit with Canberrans when it comes to consultation, that it's often a bit of a box-ticking exercise rather than genuine, let's get this thing right. And yeah, we'll continue to raise that with them.
I was recently dining at Bar Rockford in the city here, and I was talking with one of the managers there, and he was saying one of the big issues with Northbourne Avenue being closed off is foot traffic and the lack thereof. Maybe putting it to the whole panel, what can we do about that? What are your recommendations? How can we bring people into that space perhaps for another event or something that brings people in and then they go, oh, wow, there's a great restaurant there. Why don't we go there? Yeah, just putting it to the panel.
It's a good question. I guess there are things I think that can be done in terms of signage and perhaps trying to move some of those barriers back as soon as that's possible. Partly, though, the solution does actually rest with all of us here in Canberra, and the more we can all get out and support those businesses, the better. There's still parking there. The city is still open for business. It's a little more challenging, perhaps, to find those parks, but I'd really be encouraging everyone to get out and do what they can to keep those businesses going.
Yeah, I think it's really a double whammy for those businesses, because there's more and more Canberrans, when you're thinking about going out for a meal, you're going, oh, I might just save the money. And then when you think about parking or getting in here, it's like, oh, the hassle factor as well. So, yeah, I think there's a lot that could be done in terms of the parking. You know, we had someone raise a pretty good idea when it comes to not just shutting the entire car park next to the Legislative Assembly and potentially having a third of it open. So I think there are solutions there. It comes down to the political will to really support these small businesses through the next few years. Go to Slido. Why not keep Commonwealth Gardens as is and maintain the dive pool and pool where it is? Stop diminishing our public assets. I really acknowledge that there is strong feelings around civic pool, that it should just stay where it is. I think in terms of our city centre, a convention centre, a new convention centre is absolutely critical. And by moving it into Commonwealth Park, and I think crucially having like a truly like for like, and that thing needs to be open before we do anything to civic pool, is a good solution for our city. I understand that not everyone agrees with that. Some people are very attached to the civic site. We do know that there are some issues with the pool. It's clearly ageing and will need refurbishment at least. So I think this is a good solution if we can get it right, and was out there today with Tom Emerson and a bunch of other stakeholders and groups that use the the civic pool or the deep water pool, to push the ACT government, the federal government, to deliver a like-for-like facility. But I might go to Greg on the convention centre and sort of what that does for civic.
Yeah, the convention centre I think is a huge opportunity for Canberra to be a bigger, brighter, better and bolder place, and it'll have huge impacts on civic and on businesses and on employment and on a general buzz around the city. I think it's really important that the convention centre, the new one, is built at a scale and a size that's befitting of its status as a convention centre for the national capital. The facility that we've got is too small. It's falling apart in some cases. We are losing events from Canberra that would otherwise come here if we had facilities. And that's got a huge economic cost to us. So it is really important to do it. I acknowledge we need to have a pool as well, right? So I'm kind of with you. We need to get a pool organised, but we also need to get the city organised for the future. And conventions are massive business opportunities that create employment and prosperity, and we need to support that.
And just on the last one on the point on the convention centre, the statistics around return visitors after conventions is, I found incredibly compelling, just how many people will then come back with their families or by themselves to visit the city they have a convention. So I think it'll have huge flow-on effects for Canberra.
But particularly when you combine that potentially with extra connectivity from international destinations, if we can get some more flights coming in from overseas, that's a really positive thing as well. It all helps build Canberra as a real destination and one that we can all be proud of.
Yes. Hi, David. My name is Cordelia. I'm on the committee of 2 resident groups. I just wanted to say a sentence or two about the trust deficit you mentioned from citizens. There's a reason why. And I hope that the current government will develop an interest in bridging the gap that they have helped create. It's sad to see that architects, engineers, etc. are not respected and are just stepped over. Thank you.
Hi. The convention centre sounds a great idea. We just want to know what work is done to find alternate sites rather than gouge out the existing site, because some suggestions of being closer to Epic Park might have been a good location. What work was done to determine the suitability of site? I mean, civic is an option, but why would we need to sacrifice what we have, especially like for like? I think the government keeps pushing back hard on that, saying no way can you get the depth of a pool for a dive facility. And the parking issues for the Commonwealth Garden are equally a problem or problematic, and it would be a shame to lose that amenity of the gardens anyway. So where else could the convention centre be? Because, yeah, we get 8,000 seats, international travellers and others coming, fantastic, great, but where else?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. The discussions about the convention centre have been going on for 25 years or something, sort of more than half my lifetime, and certainly longer than I've been living in Canberra. My understanding is there've been quite significant sort of consideration of where it might go, but putting it in civic really is the best solution because it ties the convention centre into the city. The Adelaide Convention Centre is a great example of one that's been built really right in the city. You could say, well, it shouldn't be on the river, it should be out somewhere where the facilities to service it aren't. But it's not going to give you the best outcomes ultimately. So look, we certainly support civic as a destination for it, or the location for it. And I guess, that's kind of our position.
We'll go to Slido. What is the funding split between the Commonwealth and ACT for the estimated $40 billion needed for infrastructure to support the proposed Hume Circle development? I'm not aware of that number, but I assume there will much of the development will obviously be privately funded. The infrastructure needs will be ACT government, I assume, but I don't know if someone here knows. Yeah. Yeah, they'll all be funded by rates, I guess, the new rates that they'll be getting. That'll be their answer. Anyone else have a view on that? Okay. Well, if that person wants to get in touch, very happy to chat more. They obviously know a bit about what's happening there. But my assumption would be that AC government would pay for whatever roads they need to pay for, and then garbage collection, etc., would come from the new rates that they're pulling from the development. Potentially, and we've seen the ACT government get developers to pay for all sorts of road infrastructure elsewhere, so I assume that'll be part of the negotiations around lease variation charges and all of that.
Hi there, my name's Harriet Walker. I'm a small business owner within this footprint. So just for a bit of context, at this point we are managing Green Place upgrade, hotel building, Lyric Theatre, Commonwealth Avenue Bridge, traffic disruptions plus light rail. We signed a lease on the basis that it would be a large car park in our footprint, and that's one of the biggest considerations as a fitness facility to have. The gap that I'm finding difficult to find information on at this point is what is considered reasonable disruption to business. It seems when you look at ACT, Queensland, Victoria, there are plans, there are steps that the government are required to take in the planning process during construction and post. My experience thus far is that the planning, the information that was supposed to be collected during the planning is happening very ad hoc, and we're sort of retrofitting, assistance, and where I say assistance, it's maybe a bit of signage here or there, wayfinding and whatnot. But the definition that I'm finding really difficult to track down is what is considered reasonable disruption to business, and is it 2 weeks? Is it 3 months? At this point, we're looking at having pavement put down in front of our business, which long term improves the value of the building, which is fantastic for the business owner. It beautifies Green Place, which I'm very passionate about. I'm a born and bred Canberran, but the people who are footing the bill of that are the small business owners, and we are being asked to absorb these changes in foot traffic, changes in parking. I've documented several people who would have loved to have joined our gym, but unfortunately due to lack of parking, to not being driving around for half an hour before a class and not being able to get in. And so, yes, at this point, the biggest gap I see, and this is to your point as you were introducing this topic, is that this is not unprecedented times. This is very precedented. We had light rail stage 1. There was business disruption then. We have infrastructure going all across Australia. And at this point, it seems like the planning is very tick box exercise. You have to have, mitigation documented. But I don't seem to find a cement definition, which would be the crux of when do we start providing assistance financially to business being impacted. And I would see that as being a really strong starting point for, all jurisdictions to be establishing what is the reasonable disruption to business. How long should you have to put up with? 2 months, fine for me. I get a new footpath, it looks good, it improves value, fine. But what's 3 years for some of the other businesses, and I'm small fry in comparison. Where are these definitions, and why are they not being cemented and actually having some forward planning for when it comes to impact on small business?
Thanks, Harriet. Well, great question. Do you have any
Well, I don't have an answer. I don't believe there is a definition, and that's part of the problem, right? I think I agree with you. It would be really good to have kind of an agreed view of that. I suspect governments don't want to have that kind of definition because they don't actually want to potentially bear the cost of providing financial support, but we really need them to, and I think you're right, a couple of weeks, a couple of months maybe, most businesses are going to be able to cope with that, but once you're into 3-4 years of disruption, that is a problem.
I'll definitely chat to Tom Emerson and about that and see what can happen in the Assembly. Lily, yep.
Hello, my name's Cara O'Day. You've got a stream of my love letters about them proposing to stuff up Birinjani. I've already been around and frightened the federal ones. Alicia Payne's my local member, she's useless. The other one who's equally useless is Rachel Stephen-Smith. Look, I've cared for 36 years because I've got 2 autistic kids out of my 3. I've now got my husband wrapped around my neck like an albatross because he's developed kidney disease. And all I want to do is go on a cruise to New Zealand for 2 weeks. And the poor man's a bit frightened of me because he knows I'm fed up. But as a carer, I want Birringiri to be available. They got 10 million, build a new one. I don't want to be told that the money's gone to carers because in my letter I sent you, they only want the easy ones. Respite is needed by people who have got difficult people to look after. I'm in the demographic, I'm 65. Most of us have got an old man wrapped around an neck like an albatross, like the rhyme of the ancient mariner, he's on the nose. Caring is a thankless, shitty job, and you'll all get it sometime. You'll get a parent or a disabled kid or someone to look after. But they should be talking to the people who use Birringiri, not bloody carers ACT. I have to say their dementia cottage is good. A friend of mine's got a husband who's now a Fruit Loop. He's off with the fairies. Sorry. My question is, what are they doing about Birringiri? And I'm sorry, I was told by the federal person who's an idiot that it was a ACT government problem, and the ACT tell me it's a federal problem. No, it isn't. Both levels of government have to support carers, or otherwise I'm going to put my husband, bring him over to Rachel Stephen-Smith's office and say, here he is for 2 weeks, lovey, enjoy the experience. And he is a nice man, and he's a kind man, but I've had a belly full of it. And are there any other...
Well... Well, thanks for the question. Thank you for the letters you've sent. We have been looking at this, working on this, and really want to acknowledge the huge community effort during the election campaign to actually get them to extend the life of Birringiri till mid next year, but we need to plan beyond there. And as you said, there's $10 million on the table from the feds. I actually had a meeting today about this, and we'll continue to push them to have a solution that works for us. Birringiri is 50% of our respite beds. Yeah. Yes. Yes. And yeah, and sorry. It's just so important for Canberrans, as you said, for carers to have somewhere where they can actually just have a bit of a break. And we also know, with our hospital system being so under pressure, there are so many people who actually go to Birringiri out of hospital once they're sort of subacute, and they're looked after there. So I think this facility needs to be expanded rather than moving to a totally different model that potentially doesn't have the high care. Yeah. No, yeah. Well, I mean, thank you for the caring you've done, and I think this is something across the country when you look at just how many millions of hours Australians spend caring for free for loved ones. I think respite care is the least we can do, and something that I'll certainly continue to push on. Rory on my team is working hard on this. And as you said, one of the things that I was asking estimates about was this consultation and even co-design. People who use Barangiri, who are carers, know what they need. And talking to the department, there really hadn't been any meaningful consultation. Well, thank you. We'll certainly keep pushing really hard on that. Lily?
G'day, David. Two very quick questions from me. The first one was your data bill in Parliament. How have you gone with consultation with the government about getting that through the Parliament? And the second question was, with the raid by the AFP on the Dissent Bar and Cafe, what's the reaction been from small business?
I'll talk about Dissent quickly. Basically, all Canberrans I've spoken to have been appalled that the police are spending their time taking down clearly anti-fascist posters. You may not agree with the content of the posters, but how are we living in a country in 2026 where the police are spending time taking down posters like that? My understanding is this was the result of the hate crimes laws that were rammed through the Parliament in a single day. The Senate had half a day, had an afternoon to deal with these laws. And all of these concerns were raised around freedom of expression, about what this would mean for these sorts of things. So I think hugely concerning. I hope that the Parliament will revisit these laws. I'm not sure if they will, but I think really worrying, and I've certainly raised concerns about what happened there, and popped in and chatted to Dave at Dissent. So if people don't know, I've introduced a bill which essentially would ensure that Australians own their face, their likeness and their voice. We're living in the world of artificial intelligence where it's becoming so easy to deepfake someone. And I just don't think that people should be able to deepfake someone, to create essentially an online version of them without their consent. I'm going to wrap in this question from Pause AI and want to acknowledge all the work that you're all doing. Nobel laureates predict AI will soon do almost all white-collar work. Almost 2/3 of Canberrans do desk jobs. How do we prevent mass job losses? I think the lack of appetite on something like My Face, My Rights goes to the lack of appetite to actually regulate artificial intelligence. We learnt today that the government has spent 15 months sort of hand-picking 12 people to sit on an AI safety advisory committee, which the minister has just cancelled. The department spent $200,000 going through that process. They started with, I think, 250 candidates, got down to 12, and then they've just canned it. And we're hearing that it's going to be a sort of light touch approach to AI regulation. And so I have real concerns what that means for Australians' privacy, for deepfakes, for not actually having safeguards around job losses, what that would look like, what that means for our tax system if we do start to see mass layoffs. And we live in a country where we're very reliant on personal income tax. What will that mean for revenue? What will that mean for those people? So I think these are all questions that I've been concerned about. We've been consulting with experts. I know a lot of Canberrans are concerned about. We're just not seeing any sort of urgency from the federal government. And I think that is a real worry. Obviously with AI, we need to get regulation right where you're not throttling, you're not stopping genuine innovation and where it can help us. But we have to be putting safeguards in place against the misuse and some of the things that experts are telling us are on the way at a very fast pace.
Senator, I'm a resident at Staffordshire Terrace in Hume Circle. We met with the NCA on Monday night, and it does not appear that they will heed the advice given in the submissions based on their presentation that evening, and this will be financially devastating for residents. But are you not concerned that, given the consultation model that Kimberly has described earlier, that you get a sense that there is Canberrans are going to have their homes and their businesses safe from the NCA rezoning?
Thank you. Fiona, my team, was there on Monday night, and very happy to chat more about this. As I said, I've met with the NCA, I've asked them questions at estimates. I'm concerned that the process is not taking into account feedback. One, it was sort of done in January, which seems like a poor time to be doing this sort of consultation in Canberra. They've extended it slightly, but I think there's a real need to ensure that they're actually listening and are making changes based on feedback. And very, very happy to continue to talk if you want to.
Sorry, can I just add really quickly, one of the things that they didn't mention on Monday night is that the draft amendment is a disallowable instrument. So federal parliament could actually vote to not allow the amendment to go through. So I think that's a really key piece of information the NCA did not provide.
There's a question on the Aquatic Centre in Commonwealth Park, competition standard 50-metre swimming pool and a 5-metre deep dive pool. Yes, as I said, Tom Emerson and I were with a bunch of stakeholders at Civic Pool this morning calling for that. Talking to aquatic groups in the ACT, it turns out I don't think we have a single pool where you can actually use touchpads that is competition ready. When they built Stromlo, they made it slightly too short, and so touchpads don't fit in, which just seems ridiculous that we're building infrastructure that doesn't work for the various user groups and is too shallow for diving. Yeah, so at Stromlo Pool, they've had to take the diving blocks out from one end because it's too shallow. So taking these sorts of things into account and really having a world-class facility, I think, is what we need.
G'day, Senator. My name's Darian. My brother Jordan lives in Esperance, West Australia, and supports a lot of your positions and everything. And his question
beautiful
is,
spot.
Yeah, it is. His question is, can we overturn long-term arrangements on gas exports to get the right tax, and what is going to be likely the legal cost of doing so?
Yes, we can. If there's political will, you can do a lot of things. I think the best proposal when it comes to gas exports is, it's been kicking around for a while, but the ACTU, the Australian Council of Trade Unions, have put forward the idea of a flat 25% tax on gas exports. And that has been backed in by a number of stakeholders and experts in this space. You can take our gas, you can export it, you can make a profit, but you're going to pay us 25%. And I think that is something that we can and should do. My understanding is it would ensure that we have enough supply here in the country for households, businesses, manufacturers during the transition, and that we actually get a fair return on our exports. Because when it comes to petroleum resource rent tax, it's simply not working. And when Labor and the Greens voted to make a small tweak to the PRRT, which essentially brings forward a bit more of the revenue, every time Treasury has done updates to projections, they've downgraded it. So we're going to get less and less and less. So this is something that I think is urgent that we fix, and that's the proposal that I think has the best chance of getting up, given it comes from the ACTU, and I think is very sensible. So I'd urge people to get behind that and talk to their local member about it. There'd probably be a campaign, but my understanding is that legally there'd be no issue with changing tax arrangements.
Hello, Kevin. I live in Staffordshire Terrace on the Humes Circle thing. You're on the committee that'll look at this eventually, aren't you?
I am, and I'll be trying to get an inquiry up. That's obviously a decision for the committee, but I think it would be well worth doing.
I'm on the EC there, and most of the members or permanent residents there would actually like to see this development application taken completely away from our units, because we've got this, had very short notice of it, and we have now stopped any repair work or anything on the place. If anybody in Canberra was in the same situation asked, they'd realise we've just had to stop our lives. We've got residents who are put their places up for sale because they have to move for jobs, and they have to show the new buyer this development application. So they're in a real bind. They're losing over half their potential buyers. Now, I'm going to live there. I won't ever move out. Will you support getting rid of the development application full stop over our area of Hume Circle?
I'm really sorry to hear about that situation for residents. I'm really happy to talk more about this in terms of what can be done to amend what they've put forward. I think that's probably the best solution, I don't actually know what that would look like in terms of how they can amend it, but I think so. The what's it called? The Joint Standing Committee on National Capital and External Territories. I'll certainly be pushing to have a hearing where we can hear all of this and make recommendations before this goes into regulation. I'd certainly love to sit down and look at a map with you and chat. So, yeah. Oh, so you mean just moving the boundary? Yeah, I mean, I think that's sensible. That's not on Hume Circle, and I think should be dealt with separately if they want to. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Will you support it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that sounds sensible to me, but I'd love to chat more about it and see what, look at the boundaries and what can be done.
It seems to me that a lot of these things from the ACT planning changes, which really are now outcomes focused, has led to a lot of issues for people. There are not clear guidelines, so that's, and federally that we have really weak opposition. And I don't think governments listen properly, their ears aren't open unless they're fearing an opposition. I don't know what we do about that.
Well, I think Canberra does what Jesse Price almost did in Bean. 350 votes in what has been traditionally a very safe seat. I think that is what you're seeing independents do is actually... I agree, you need strong opposition, you need robust debate on ideas and on policy, and I think increasingly you've seen the independents do that, and I mean, certainly seems to be working. The Prime Minister's been pretty annoyed with me lately, and I kind of take that as a... Yeah, I think it's, that's the job, is to actually be really pushing hard while we wait to see if the coalition ever get it together.
Briefly, Wendy Elford here. We have, I think, a repeating situation that NCA and ACT government are obviously working to agendas to develop an area. I don't know much of that planning, but we're also dealing with similar issues in Woden where, there's a plan for increased density, but the implications for that are not thought out at all. So the infrastructure that needs to be developed later, schools, aged care, community facilities, green space. We don't have a lake there, for example. You lose all your amenity, just become a passageway from north to south, just to please centre. And, you know, build some buildings and no one will have any of the amenities that they need. It seems that, and there are other examples like Canberra City Farm, listening, you know, a listening exercise but no outcomes. No one finds out what they've found out and then make the decisions without us having visibility and them showing us the long-term implications. My question is, how can we make it more mandated that the consultation is broader and brings in some of the further implications much more soundly rather than having divide and conquer? I see too much of that.
I mean, that's a great question. The two things I hear a lot from Canberrans about when it comes to development and the future of our city is they recognise that things are going to change, but they want to hold on to the feel of Canberra. And so if you want to do that, you've got to really plan at a precinct level. And I think someone like Fiona Carrick is having a really big impact in this space, particularly with Woden, where she is really challenging the government and saying, you can't just do this block by block. What is the vision for Woden? Where is the shared amenity? Where is the infrastructure? What's happening to the pool? All these questions that really should come before you put people in. As to what can be done, this really is squarely an ACT issue, and I know Fiona Carrick and Tom Emerson are doing a lot of work in this space, but I recognise it's a real frustration with Canberrans. Do you want to say anything about precincts or no? Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Look, I mean, I agree. Like when we're seeing development happening, we need to make sure that we've got all the facilities there from a business point of view, from a community point of view. It is really important.
We'll go back to Slido, and then two more at the back. What are you and your colleagues doing to get meaningful gambling reforms enacted at all levels of government? For me, this is, I think, something that the last parliament and this parliament, the longer it goes on, should be deeply embarrassed about, is the lack of action on gambling, meaningful gambling reform. We have the Murphy report, and it's coming up 3 years in June. It'll be 3 years that we had a landmark report that had the unanimous backing of the parliament, and we've done nothing. The government have not even responded to that report. I've been working a lot with Kate Cheney, who's the member for Curtin over in Perth, on this. She was on the committee that delivered that Murphy report, and really trying to get the government to act. We've done a number of things in the Senate. There's private senators' bills, private members' bills, but just no appetite from the major parties to actually implement the Murphy report. And I think crucially around gambling advertising, to actually get on with removing all of these ads that really are, as Peter Murphy said, grooming children. If you honestly, this doesn't sound like that interesting, but the foreword to the "You Win Some, You Lose More" report that Peter Murphy wrote is, I think, will go down as an incredible piece of political leadership. It's all in there, and she foresaw all of the excuses that we're hearing. I doubt she thought that she would hear them from the Prime Minister of her own party, but unfortunately we've heard them. And she says gambling companies advertise so much because it works, and they're grooming children. And we're actually at this point where we're losing sight of what sport is for. It's becoming a vehicle for gambling. So something that we're working on hard. We're sort of planning a bunch of things this year to really try and put the pressure on the government. But I think it's going to just take more and more Australians getting fed up and saying to their local member, listen, if you don't do something on this, I'm going to look for someone else at the next election, because we're the biggest losers in the world. And anecdotally, I'm having more and more, particularly young men, coming up to me and pulling me aside and saying, listen, I'm ashamed to say, but I've got such a problem, and it's so hard in this country to stop, where you're just inundated with ads, and that's what all the experts are telling us. So something that we're keen to really keep pushing over the next couple of years.
Thank you for your time, Senator Pocock. I understand there's a little bit of overlap with the gentleman's question regarding the dissent bar. I just wanted to ask, though, given the recent presence of some New South Wales police personnel in the ACT for the training of ACT police regarding motorcycle and other vehicular traffic, do you have any concerns regarding the possible overflow of the more almost militant approach to community policing, which seems to have been so much more popular in New South Wales more recently, as we've seen highlighted in the news?
Well, I think a lot of Australians were concerned and appalled by the footage that we saw coming out of Sydney, and that's certainly not what we want to see in the ACT. My engagement with the AFP over the last few years has been really positive. They are a very stretched police force. They're one of the lowest paid in the country, and I think generally do very good work with the resources available to them. I certainly think that is what Canberrans expect, that they will maintain a professional standard, and you've got to feel sorry for the officers who are obviously told to come and take down those posters. Like, that's surely not what you sign up to the police for. So I think that part of it's on politicians, but certainly AFP turn up to Senate estimates, and I'm often there asking questions about things that I don't think meet community expectations. But happy to chat more if you've got a bit more intel or an example you want me to raise.
G'day, David. My name's Andy. Just want to talk about one of the limitations that's been raised with our democracy, that when you have safe seats at a state and a federal level, it can actually result in negative outcomes because there's no incentive to do better. And I think you're hearing people say we're not feeling listened to on a lot of issues, whether it's pools, whether it's schools, whether it's roads, whether it's care. Safe seats don't equal better outcomes, even when they're for the same party. And I think in the CBD here, when you come out here on a Friday night and just see how dead this city is, and it's embarrassing. And so I reckon one thing I'd like to see out of this is a bit of a challenge to our state and federal representatives. If we can give them 3 things from the business community in this district that they want to see, and put the challenge to them, work together and help this district, because it's just being hammered, and it looks like it will be hammered. And it's the capital city, and it's absolutely embarrassing on a Friday night to see the state that it's in. You come out of the Jollymont Centre, welcome to the capital of Australia, and it's walls and it's boarded up shops and there's no one around, and these businesses are crying out for help, and you can see people not feeling listened to, a sense from politicians they either don't care or there's no consequence for not doing better. And it's nice to see us cracking. You're the window into this, and so's Mr. Emerson, and so's Jesse Price, and so's Fiona Carrick, and that's the window that we have in to start to break down this structure and push our politicians to do better. But I think if we can give them a list, 3 things, test them on it. Here's what businesses want to see. Here's what communities see, and get them to work together, not buck past one to the other, because you can tell from the room. That's the thing that gives people a lot of grief. It's not ours, it's someone else's problem. They're supposed to be on the same party, work together, give them 3 things to work on.
Thanks, Andy. Well said. We can certainly work with small business owners here, chat to Greg and maybe come up with that list and send it out to people and start pushing them really, really hard. How are we going for time? I think that's it. Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate you coming out. Honestly, you look around the world, you turn on the TV, politics around the world is not doing well, but this always gives me hope when you're seeing people turn up, engage, and get involved. So thank you for doing that. Myself and my team will be hanging around if you do want to chat or have more questions, but please join me in thanking Greg and Skye for joining us this evening.